Well, Khemit, last time we talked a bit about your character arc and arc self-authoring and some of that in conjunction. What's on your mind for today?
Well, I figured we could talk about some of that a little more because there's been some new, more recent developments.
Okay.
So, I figured we could talk about that. And I also figured I'd share a little about my own personal story relating to self-authoring. So,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Sounds good.
So I guess I should introduce myself first, just a little bit for anyone who didn't watch our last video together. But my name is Khemit Bailey. I'm the founder of the Character Arc, which is basically a curriculum for helping people get unstuck. And I also run the self-authoring collaboration group on Facebook. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is more recently we've been doing 5-day challenges for future authoring that have been really helpful in actually getting people through the program, and have also been really helpful to me personally. So that's basically who I am.
So what's a 5-day challenge?
Yeah, so there's a video that people can look up pretty easily on YouTube that's titled "Start by Doing It Badly." It's actually a clip taken from Jordan Peterson, one of his speeches, and he's talking about how people should approach the future authoring program. And in the self-authoring collaboration group, which has like 2,000 people now, which is pretty amazing. I've noticed a lot of people buy the program and then don't start it. They'll buy it and they ask a lot of questions, but then they sit on it.
Yeah.
So I just started about maybe five months ago to start doing these challenges, and it basically is saying, let's take 20 minutes a day for 5 days and do it badly, right? So just rush through it, be haphazard, but just get writing. And this is the third one we're doing now, and we're actually in the middle of it right now. So today is the Thursday. People will be done tomorrow, but it's been really useful for people getting all the way through it. And so it's basically just a way of doing it really badly, getting out of that like uncertainty, trying to be perfect mode, and just get to the program. So,
well, so my wife and I, we homeschooled our 5 kids, and one of the things, so one of our, you really get to know your kids when you're homeschooling them. And one of them always had trouble starting. And so one of the phrases that we had was, basically starting is half the work. And it's really true.
Yep.
And I had my first job I had out of seminary was I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, and I had a mentor. And, I got there and I'm looking around, and of course, as a snot-nosed kid, I'm seeing all the things that I thought were, deficient about this man's 30 years of work. And he told me right off the bat, he said, some things worth doing are worth doing badly. And I never forgot that, because so often it's like we have this, and it's really a reflection of our ego that, well, we want our product to reflect who I think I am more than who I really am. Right. And so, no, I think that's tremendous.
Yeah. Well, it's, the first time we did it, I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if it would actually help people out, but it's exactly what you said. The thing that I noticed on day one, everyone, because part of the challenge is after they're done with their 20 minutes for the day, which usually actually goes longer than that, but it's almost like you give yourself permission, right? It's like, you only have to do it for 20 minutes.
Right.
And then people write for an hour and a half, and they're like, oh, I overdid it. I'm like, great, you did it badly. But when they write down, what they say is, the fact that I had that time constraint actually made me start writing instead of thinking about how good I was doing it, or like making sure that everything was perfect about my plan, which I always tell people, it's like, your plan's not going to be perfect. It's not even going to be good probably, but it's better than having no plan. So so the 5-day challenges there's something I want to start doing more regularly if possible. They take up quite a bit of time, but they're super fun.
Oh, that's really helpful. I would be a better pastor if I had more of what you're bringing to the table here, which is, practical, doable, starting, because I see so often, especially idealists out there who, they want to do everything right the first time. And I remember, again, also homeschooling some of my other children. So the one had trouble starting, he didn't have too much trouble doing things badly. But my girls, they're both so smart. But if they if they couldn't do it perfectly the first time, they'd get so frustrated, and it'd be like, sweetheart, you're doing great. No, but it's not.
Yeah. No, that actually resonates with me too. And I think the reason I decided to do this challenge was because I'm the same way. I wonder if it's maybe an introversion, extroversion thing. Like for me, I've always wanted to have things figured out completely before I started doing them.
Yeah.
So like I didn't talk till I was 3 years old, and my first word was like elephant.
Really?
I was just ruminating in the back, thinking I want to get this right. But it's been really helpful for me to do things really badly also. And so when I saw that video with Jordan Peterson's advice and noticing the problems people were having in the group, I realized, okay, this is actually a good thing to maybe help people move forward. And also it actually has helped me in like my own personal life, because now as an entrepreneur, I have to be a self-starter, right? I can't wait for anything to be perfect.
Oh, that's right.
And so guaranteed it won't be. So I have to just get out there and do things. And so that mindset is really useful.
Yeah. And I've always been the other way. So my wife had a degree in Spanish when we went to the Dominican Republic. I had some high school and some college Spanish, but I didn't know the language at all. Mm-hmm. And I remember one of the missionary orientation people said, when to learn a language, you have to make 1 million mistakes. So you might as well get going. And so when I got there, I just barged right into the language and I just butchered it. My wife just looked on in horror as, what are you doing with this poor language? You're just abusing and mutilating it. It's like, hey, I'm getting my 1 million mistakes out of the way. And the YouTube channel has been the same thing. I mean, I don't, for the most part, I don't edit my videos. I don't, I do the minimum possible to posting, which is people are like, wow, you post so much. Yeah, because it's all crappy. You can post a lot if it's crappy, but there's usually something okay in the crap, and you can make a contribution. Oh, that's right. You do get better faster. So what kinds of things have you learned by learning to do things badly?
Well, I had one example popped in my head when you were talking about your language experience, because I didn't have the same experience. I had kind of the opposite, because I was always really shy when I was young. And the first language I tried to learn, well, the second language I really spent a lot of time learning was Mandarin, Chinese, when I was in the Air Force. And there we had it was a structure. So that was easier because you have classes to go to. You're not just out there in the wild trying to learn. But I always noticed I had some classmates who just, they would get out there and just start babbling right away. And I was like, you are making so many mistakes. And I can understand that they were making mistakes, but I couldn't do it myself correctly.
Really?
But part of me was like, oh gosh, I can't believe you're able to do that. Like, it just seems like so bad. Like how do you deal with the mental anguish that comes from it? They had no mental anguish.
That's right.
There was none. They was just like, blabbering away. And then their Mandarin got better so much faster than mine did, especially the speaking. And that was a lesson to me. So then when I actually moved to China some years later, I already had a baseline of language skills, but I realized, okay, I got to do what they did. I got to get out there and just sound like an idiot, and it made me get better, much faster than I would have if I still had that other mindset of sitting in a room and studying. I think language is a great example because it's one of those things you can't learn on your own.
No. And I think part of this is temperamental, as you say. Introverts and extroverts. Extroverts are often a little bit more, they just go out there and do things badly and learn as they go. I think part of it is also the educational structures that we have, because I think those implicitly teach us, here's all the preparation, you're doing all this stuff abstractly and theoretically before. In fact, I mean, in our culture, especially if you grow up in an urban setting, unlike, let's say, rural communities, you grow up in an urban setting, people don't let you do anything. You're not responsible for anything until you're like 25, and then they give you something. And that's really a rather poor way to raise a human being. Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in cities my whole life. I mean, I was born in kind of the country, but then I moved to New York when I was really young. And it's definitely one of those, there are some things you notice other people being able to handle more easily than you can handle them.
Yep.
In those early stages of like having to learn a big city, because a big city is like, it's like a personality in itself.
Yep.
And New York is like a really oppressive personality. So
Yeah.
interacting with it was actually really good for me, because it brought me out of my shell a little bit and made me have to deal with the world a little more.
What year did you move to New York?
I was about 2 or 3 years old, so that'd be 1984.
Okay. Yeah. I graduated from high school in 81. So,
okay.
And that's when I left the New York area, because I grew up all my years in Paterson, just outside of New York.
Oh, nice.
And, but my father was raised in, my grandfather had rural churches. And so my father was raised in the country. So he grew up doing farm work just for other farmers. And I think, if you're growing up on a farm and your family says, you take care of the chickens or you take care of the pigs, and you might be 6 or 7 or 8, but there are consequences for not doing your job well. So you're going to go out and you're probably going to do what you saw your parents do because you saw them do it. And so actually, without even knowing it, you've learned all these things. But then the family's going to hold you accountable, because if the chickens all die, the family's going to suffer. So right away, responsibility is built in as you grow up. And there was an article I read a number of years ago that talked about engineering students, and they noticed that engineering students who grew up on farms and in rural areas where they had a lot of tactile experience just built into their lives, became some of the best engineers, because engineering education is very theoretical. You learn the math, you learn the physics, but they also had this tactile understanding that you don't get by sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, and well, it's like a manipulation of objects, right? And so you're manipulating mental objects in one place and physical objects in the other, but it translates, right? That kind of, it makes you get an intuitive understanding of how to manipulate objects. And I actually think that when you talk about engineering, or any study really, or language, the process you're describing is like getting familiar with that hero's journey kind of thing, right? It's like you got to go into the depths and discover yourself and something in you that can actually handle it, and then come out at the end of the week, or at the end of the journey, with something of value. And I said the end of the week because I'm thinking of the 5-day challenge, which is exactly like that. So we just had Wednesday yesterday, and Wednesday is always the day when everyone has like the most depressing posts. People get in there and they post, they're like, God, like this is so hard, and like it's dragging on, and 20 minutes isn't long enough, and it's really hard. And so that's the day where people need the most encouragement. But then they hit the upswing and they come out the other side with an actual product. But it's really cool to visualize it that way. I think is useful, because it tells you there's something else on the other side. If you don't have any framework, you just think, oh, okay, this sucks, and here I am. Whereas now oh no, this is what it feels like to be at the inflection point where things start to get better.
Right. You have to be bad at something before you can become good at something. Otherwise, you never do. Again, back with missionary training, missionary organizations knew not to send people out on 1-year terms, because psychologically, the first 3 months you're living in that other country, it's in a honeymoon period. Everything is new, everything is fresh, everything exciting. After that, all of the frustrations of that culture and that country and that language start to bear in. And at the 1-year mark, over time, missionary organizations figured out you were at your lowest. And so if you came home for home service after 1 year, you weren't going back.
Go back,
It was like, my country is wonderful, that country sucks. But after 2 years, after you had done all that hard work of assimilating, you had a lot better equilibrium. You could better understand the strengths and weaknesses of your home culture and the strengths and weaknesses of your new host culture.
Sure. That's actually interesting, because I've lived abroad several times and I never put that together, but that's exactly my experience. When I first moved to China, I spent 1 year in Beijing, and at the end of it was exactly at the end of the first year, I was like, oh God, I hate this place. I really, it was really bad. I just was not happy. I didn't feel like anything was going right, but I ended up staying, and I started doing more traveling inside the country and learning more. And then the rest of the time was much better. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So when you say people come to your program to get unstuck, what kinds of things are they stuck on?
Well, so, you know, a lot of different things actually. And so the way I think of it is I like to think of the character arc, and it actually kind of ties in, the language ties in also as a theater for change. You know, so fiction is a big part of the work that people do in the process of the course. And so it basically is like taking a moment to step back from the day-to-day minutia of the daily life and look at the big picture. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Which I think is kind of that's like a good encapsulation of what wisdom is, you know, knowing why you're doing what you're doing. And people don't get a chance to think about that very often in their daily lives. So a lot of times it's people who are in careers that are successful, you know, they're doing pretty well, but for some reason they still have some dissatisfaction, or they're in relationships and they're feeling like it's not going where they want it to go, or not going anywhere. So, you know, those are two of the domains. Sometimes it's social life. I think the interconnectivity of our, you know, online interconnectivity of our culture now is really damaging to people's like social networks, or they're just not developing them in the first place. And so a lot of people have these issues, and younger people having issues with not making friends or not having friends. And so that's another place where people feel stagnant. But the beauty of the course, in my opinion, is that like I don't have to tell people anything about what to do. I just basically I'm giving them a space and a framework for them to discover, you know, what they think they should do and what domains are the most important for them to work on.
Well, that's in my experience the best kind of learning, because telling people what to do is pointless, because number one, you probably don't know, and number two, they're probably not going to listen to you. So it's and so I'll often have it but people instinctively, they ask for it. They'll be like, "Pastor, just tell me what to do," and it's like, "No, I'm not going to do that." Well, why not? Well, because number one, I don't know, and number two, you won't listen anyway. Because when I do give in, I mean, there's some people that, you know, I will say, this is what you need to do. And they don't. And they come back and they ask me, they tell me the next week, tell me what to do. I said, I told you last week and you didn't do it anyway. So why should I bother making up something for you today? That is so common in a pastoral conversation.
I bet you have a lot of those conversations.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I think that's really wise, because when people, it takes a lot of patience if you're the facilitator or mentor or pastor or whatever role you're playing, counselor. It takes a lot of patience for people to sort of figure their things out. But when they do it a lot better than either you or I could do it for them.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's necessary. I don't think that, you know, that you can, I don't think you can learn. I think we might've talked about this a little bit last time, but I was reading On Becoming a Person, that Carl Rogers book. And he was talking about, he had some pretty out there ideas, and he didn't think people could learn from other people, period. He just thought all you could do was create a space and then learning would happen. And he did some seminars, I think at Harvard, where he ran it like that. And people were so confused at first, but then it actually seemed to yield some results. So I think that actually makes a lot of sense. You know, I'm not sure how far you can take that, but it really is something you have to do for yourself. And I think it actually relates also to discovering, you know, what you value, like what are your underlying values, because that tells you what to do. And so a big part of the character arc course and curriculum is discovering what your values are by looking at images of what it is that you resonate with. And then once you know that, it's almost like you're pulled towards what you need to be doing or who you want to be, like inexorably. So it's useful.
No, that's very true. That's very true. Now with it's interesting, you know, one of the things that I'm noticing in terms of the whole Jordan Peterson movement, that, I mean, his long book tour, his wife's illness, his hospitalization, that, you know, in many ways that sort of took him off the radar. He retreated. And people who 2-3 years ago got very excited, digested all his videos, were all geeked out about his book. Usually, you know, women like the book, men like the videos. You know, and now many of them are sort of in the bloom is off the rose. The easy stuff is done. Now they are very much in the place where, okay, well, now you can't really blame your lethargy and low functionality on a lack of information. Someone told you basically what you need. which
Mhm.
you probably didn't even need to be told that, but it was a win for you because you got excited and motivated and
Mhm.
decided to start some new things in your life. Now I've noticed that for a lot of people, now regular life has set in. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
now's really the point at which, okay, you're not going to just simply feed off Jordan Peterson rambling on stage for an hour. Now it's time for you to sit down and
Mhm.
do the work of, keeping your room clean
Yeah.
or looking at your life. That's a different phase. That's an important transition, but it's actually a vital phase from going from being fed to feeding yourself, maintaining yourself, and then at some point being a person who can be useful for others.
Yes. Yes. I think all the great teachers, right, of psychologists, the people who have advanced like our understanding of how people can move forward with their lives, are very transparent about saying that all the wisdom that they're trying to impart is not meant to be just taken as the musings of like a guru. It's something that you have to internalize and then use. Because if you don't do that, then like you said before, if you don't use it yourself, you don't really have it. It's just something you heard that maybe inspires you in the moment. You get really excited about it. I can't remember where I heard this, but someone called that phenomenon an extinction burst, like
Huh.
where it's like you have this really big burst of energy, and you almost get like the satisfaction before doing anything, but then your motivation to actually achieve the thing goes away because you had the pre-satisfaction from the emotional catharsis of hearing someone talk about it. And I think that's a good way to think about it, because that you're right, when people don't have the influx of new videos and new speeches, then they do kind of lose that momentum and feel almost like like they need that to keep going, and I think they become dependent on it. And so that's another thing that I try to address also in my curriculums, because I want to make sure people aren't making themselves dependent. If you make yourself dependent on some outside, not saying you don't need motivation, right, or you can't ask for help, but if you make yourself dependent on a single source for your forward progress, then you're going to end up disappointed.
Yeah, and it's always sort of a dance, because on one hand, all of us are dependent in some ways for some things, but there's a discernment that has to happen to learn, okay, I'm being dependent in this way on this thing or this person, and I shouldn't be. And
Hmm.
for each
Yeah.
person, that's individual.
Yeah.
I there have been, I mean, if someone is dependent on a medication or dependent on certain types of support, for each of us, there's certain degrees of legitimate dependency and then illegitimate dependency. And it,
Hmm.
and it,
Yeah.
and we're not unbiased in discerning which is which. And it's
Yeah.
usually with the result of a little bit of challenge that, we have to, okay, I really enjoy being dependent on this, but no, that's illegitimate. You've really got to not be dependent on that and to keep moving forward.
Yeah. It's
I'm
like
sure you deal
one
with
of my
that a lot.
you deal with that a lot, you said?
No, I'm sure you deal with that a lot
Oh,
with your people.
yeah, I do. In fact, I have a little mini story that I tell about that. That's it's like a light story, but it illustrates the point. And so my girlfriend, my fiance now actually is
Congratulations.
thank you. She works in the food industry, and so she does recipe creation, and so she's always making these weird concoctions that are delicious, which is great for me. But um, she makes a lot of food, and so whenever I want to know what's in the fridge, I always would. I spent a lot of time asking her. I'd say, what do we have? And she'd answer me, but then after a while, she started like saying, just go look in the fridge. Like, you can get to know yourself, and she would get. And at first I was like, well, why, you know better than I do what's in there. And then finally I realized, okay, there was a little lazy piece of me, right, that liked being dependent on her, liked using her as a little crutch. And I didn't need to, I could go do it myself. And I think, that's a microcosm of that same idea that, there are consequences to using crutches, right? If you need them, yes, but knowing when you need them and when you don't is super important. Yeah.
Well, and you talked a little bit earlier about the new challenge that I think younger generations have now because of social media, because of these facet deficient relationships we have via social media and electronic communication. A real relationship like a girlfriend or a fiance or a spouse, that relationship is so multifaceted that built into something like that, all of those little, so many of those character defects that you have, the little lazy habits that you've accumulated, all of these things, sort of come to the fore. And then the marriage, the relationship becomes the arena by which you have to work on these things. And if you don't work on these things, there are consequences. And the crazy thing about, let's say, a marriage, I've been married now 31 years,
Whoa.
is, so you don't, some of these things, you don't work on for 31 years or maybe you can't work on for 31 years, or you get stuck, or, but you just can't get away from it. And what has happened in our culture is that we have so much power, so many options, so much convenience, that we have gotten relationally lazy. And so, well, I don't want to work on these things, so I'm done, I'm out. It's like, okay, you can do that, but what you're going to miss out on is all of the potential growth and learning. That's, Tim Keller, in his book on marriage, which is a book I appreciate, talked about this quite a bit, because people think marriage is supposed to make you happy. And the truth is, a lot of times it doesn't. Marriage is supposed to make you better. And it often the kind of better that we want to be in the abstract, or we want to think we've arrived at, but you don't get that better without pain and work and effort and suffering often.
Right. Well, as with all things, right?
Yeah.
Remember the name of that book?
Is it the case for, it's Tim, if you just go to Amazon and search for Tim Keller marriage, it'll come up. My Tim Keller shelf is up there. So, but it's his marriage book, and I really appreciated it, because so much marriage advice. Here's the funny thing. So much marriage chatter in our culture is about happiness. But if you actually read books that are trying to help people in struggling marriages, you realize that so much of marriage is what you need to do to improve, and all the ways that you don't. And the brutal reality, which is a life lesson, that you may do all the improving necessary or possible, and if your spouse doesn't, you're still going to suffer and maybe not even succeed at marriage. But you can't make your spouse do it, or control them to do it, or all those little tricks that you're going to try at first and discover they don't work. And so, marriage, family, any kind of relationship that you can't easily get out of has the potential for, actually producing in you the kind of character quality that we all admire in other people.
Yes.
But, it's like looking at someone who's in great physical shape, and it's like, wow, I wish I was in that shape. Well, do the work. It didn't just happen for them. Some, in some ways, maybe genetically they were predisposed, so happy are they, but that's life.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, I like to think of, the only thing you can really do to, try to convince someone that your way of doing things is better, is really to entice them towards it, and that is, I think that means all you can do is do that thing, so if, like, a lot of times I hear people talking about, why people won't act the way they think they should act. And it's like, well, I mean, one, you can't control anyone. You can barely control yourself. And when you show people through your own actions that, you know, there's maybe a better way, I've noticed in my life at least that actually is much more powerful. You know, when I have arguments within my family or with my fiance or anything, I try to, you know, take whatever I think the high road is as much as possible.
Yeah.
And more often than not, that works.
Yeah.
Or, you know, better than taking the low road.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's better.
Well, that's very true.
Yeah.
But even those paths are, and that's what's so hard for people to recognize. Even those paths, when you get into a relationship and you keep taking the high road, your partner might hate you for it for a while. Oh, you always take the high road. You think you're so good. It's like, yeah. Well, I mean, it's so funny because life is so complex that there's no, you know, people are always looking for this silver bullet, and it's like, it ain't there, baby. It ain't there.
Well, you know, it's because it is a judgment, right? You're watching someone outperform you. It's a judgment on your behavior, on your
That's exactly right.
But it's a self-judgment. You know, you're inflicting it on yourself. Now, this is actually ties in with the character arc, because it's one of the reasons I like to use movies, right, as the encapsulation of the thing you admire, is because it doesn't trigger that same reflex. You know, if you see someone in a film or, you know, in some work of fiction, whatever it is,
that's right,
acting out some proposition that is, you know, maybe better than the one that you are, and you see them having success, or, you know, the story plays out so that things work out for them, you understand that on a fundamental level, and you don't feel that judgment, that shame at your own inadequacy as much. So it lets you really like look at it, you know, whereas otherwise, if you look at it, it's too shameful to even, you know, conceive of your position in relationship to it. But in stories, that doesn't happen as much. So I think it's really powerful.
Oh, that's true. I'd never thought of it that way. That's really good. I'm going to steal that, because I think it's so true.
It is, yeah, I think so.
Because when you're doing it in the context of especially a binary relationship, and you do it for years and years, oh, you know, but if it's third personified out there, oh, that's really true. That's really helpful.
Yeah, it gives you a little distance from it.
So what books and movies have you read recently that you found helpful?
That I found helpful. Well, I just finished. I just finished The Golden Bough by James Fraser. It's like kind of one of those. It's like a Hero with a Thousand Faces kind of book, talking about all the different world rituals that are aiming at the same concept. And it was where he outlined the principle of the dying God and like the God being reborn. Pretty interesting. It was written in 1895, and so that shows a little bit, but it was interesting. I watched Joker last night.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I did. And
I mean, I'm really anxious to hear what you thought of it.
Okay, well, I'll tell you this. Okay, I don't want to give anything away, so no spoilers. But
okay,
you know, everybody knows the basic underlying premise of the movie. So
yeah.
I love movies that show the descent. I don't know what it is about my personality, but for some reason, there's something about me that's drawn to watching the downward spiral, because I think it teaches me something. And okay, I can actually tie this together to future authoring, I think, in some small way. So in future authoring, there's two exercises, right? There's there's a future to avoid, and there's the ideal future. And you have to write both. So you basically write a story about which one of those, about what happens in each of those futures for yourself. I think some people are more motivated by the ideal future, and some people are more motivated by the future to avoid. Everyone's motivated by both, but you know, maybe one more than the other. I've always been more motivated by the future to avoid. You know, I want to stay away from that, you know, and having been in places that were close to that, I don't want no part of it. So, yeah, so when I watch movies, right, like Requiem for a Dream.
Oh, yeah.
Count Mr. Ripley is another good one.
Yeah.
They show these characters kind of going through these, you know, downward spirals, these villainous turns. And it shows the ways that even someone we like and that we feel has excuses can mess their life up so bad that it's not recoverable. Yeah. And so Joker was a movie that was kind of like that, and I like movies like that. And Joaquin Phoenix is really great, so I thought it was really good. But I think that those two sides of the coin really will make or break that movie for you. You know, if you're someone who likes to see the shining beacon, you know, if you're a Superman person as opposed to a Batman person, then you know, it might not be your favorite, but for me, I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
see too much of the controversy. I actually made sure not to read any of the things that people were saying about it,
Yeah.
because I wanted to go into it with a clean head.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think nowadays people are seeing controversy everywhere, even when it doesn't
Yeah.
exist. So
Yeah.
I didn't see anything that was too overt. I liked it.
Yeah, I loved it too, and you're right. There are warriors and worriers, and probably worriers are this is the future I want to avoid, and the warriors are this is the future I want to grasp. So,
Yeah, I wish
but
I was a
no,
warrior. I guess not.
well, I don't know. I'm sort of, I like movies. I'm fascinated by. Well, I don't think fascinated is the wrong word. Um, this morning, so I've mentioned a number of times for years, there's a guy who slept right outside my door. This morning I got to my office and there was this mass right outside my door. I thought, oh no, what am I gonna deal? I have to deal with Daniel, and he can't be here because of the restraining order. But I got here and the person was all covered with the blanket, so I lift up the blanket. And the guy looks, oh, it's not Daniel. Okay, I said, so now you can't sleep. I can't start this all over again with everything that happened before. But I I I have always lived surrounded by so many people who are in so much pain because of the descent that they have suffered. And it's always a combination of what's been done to them and what they have or haven't done. I mean, it's always a combination. And so, but yet it's amazing because out of the same place of struggle, you see some people rise and just become great,
Mhm.
and you see other people descend. And then I think we as human beings always look for, well, what was it that made the difference?
Yeah,
And you can almost always find reasons
yeah,
in both ways, but you can't find one reason that's true of every situation.
right.
And so yet there are so many commonalities. And that was one of the hard things that I had to come to terms with when I went overseas and was a missionary, is that I think implicitly in my mind, I thought I could do more saving than
Mhm.
I could. And I
Mhm.
had to come to terms with the fact that there was likely no amount of stuff I could do that could lift this mass of people from their pretty determined descent that is just so common and so obvious, but coming from another place
Mhm.
that where that descent wasn't as common and obvious. Um, and I had to come to terms with that. It's a brutal way to crush your Messiah complex, but the
Yeah,
Messiah complex needs to be crushed.
of course. Yeah. Well, I think that there's something about understanding that free will cuts both ways. That's important to understand. Like if you're an autonomous human being, as we all are to some degree, right? That implies that there's some choice. And of course, there are some people whose situations are so horrible that we can't even imagine what it would be like to be them. But even those people have some element of choice.
Yeah,
And I think that you can't take that from them. And people try, right? But I
yeah,
think the only lesson you can learn from that is that you can't do it.
yeah,
No one ever succeeds at doing it, I think,
yeah,
unless they're completely malevolent, and that ends up a whole different way. But I do see that, like, these two, to bring it back to Batman and Superman, there's the shining beacon, right, that we can look towards and hope for, and then there's the thing in the darkness that we want to stay away from. And sometimes, though, the darkness is comforting, right, because we can hide in it. But sometimes, we all really want the light, and
yeah,
so it's hard to, but when people don't see it, it's impossible to make them see it, which is why I was talking about, enticing people towards it as best you can, which is obviously a lot of what you did on your mission and what you've been doing with your life since. So,
yeah, yeah,
that's the work, I guess.
yeah, yeah. And that a lot of those reflections get into the Calvinist tradition, where I think part of what I like about that tradition is that I think the post-Enlightenment culture likes to maintain an optimism, which is laudable and which I appreciate, which says, oh, we can do it. But there's always this element of something else happens that we can't account for, that both seems to save and condemn. And yeah, the Joker, I think, was a tremendous film, partly because it, one of the things I loved, and I really loved about Jordan Peterson when I listened to him, was that it is so human to walk through Auschwitz and say, those horrible Nazis.
Yeah.
But it is much more productive to walk through Auschwitz and say, I could have been one of the perpetrators.
Yeah.
And because that realization actually helps you guard against yourself. Because to I think, in a sense, the definition of naive is to simply imagine and presume our goodness. And again, a 360-degree relationship like a marriage, well, you don't know how bad you are? Well, the person that you've just shared a stage with and professed undying love to the world will, in fairly short order, tell you just how bad you are, and sometimes show you, which is far more painful. And that's the glory and tragedy and blessedness of 360-degree relationships.
Yeah, well, I having been on both sides of that fence to some degree, I choose to have that relationship over not having it any day. I think you have to want to see your flaws to some degree if you really want the whole package.
Yeah.
And what you said about like those movies like Joker, like seeing a character and walking through Auschwitz and saying, how is this me? Like Jordan Peterson talks a lot about identification with the hero, right? And that being one of the proper paths forward in life. I found that so profound when I first heard him speak about that. But I think also that identification with the villain is insanely useful. And that's what those movies do. When you can sit in the villain's shoes and say, and when a director or an actors make the character come alive so much that you believe it, you see it, you say, that could happen, that could happen, that could happen, and it leads all the way down. And where you feel like, like you're with them the whole time. I think that's powerful because it says, oh, okay, I could go there. I could see myself going there. And knowing that you have the capability to go there, as long as your eyes are set on something higher, will keep you away from, just stumbling blindly into those traps. So,
yeah. No, that's very true. That's very true. So at the beginning, you mentioned some stuff you wanted to share. Why don't you bring some of that forward now?
Sure. Well, I was going to talk more about just my experience with the self-authoring suite, which is atypical, I think, because I had like a long history with personal development tools and frameworks before I encountered it. And so when I first did it, I was mainly doing it because I wanted to see what it was like. I had heard Jordan Peterson speak about it, and I thought that sounds really useful, and it seems to be helping people. And I read some of the studies that he published about what it did for students at Mohawk and et cetera. And I wanted to kind of just understand it from a tactical standpoint. But after doing it, I realized, and I don't think it's just coincidence that some of these insanely gratifying things have started to happen in my life. And one of those is the impact that I've been seeing some of my work have in the self-authoring collaboration group and with these 5-day challenges. Like, none of those were things that I would have ever thought to do, not just with future authoring, but in any shape or form before I had done that program. It just really kind of, it sparked something in me a little bit, like the creation of that plan, while also, imbibing all the information that I was taking in from lectures and from all the books I was reading, made me want to get out there and actually like do something in the world that was useful. And it's been like it's been really gratifying in a way that I couldn't have predicted. I mean, it's a lot of work, and it's in my free time because my main job is the character arc. But it's like one of the things that really keeps me going, because I get to see like this instant impact, and I get to like really respond to people who are obviously struggling. You know, there's a lot of people who are, we always decry social media and like this
Yeah.
online environments, but those are just people, you know, behind all those avatars.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are having a really tough time.
Yeah.
And they don't really know where to go. And so having those spaces now that are, you know, that I get to be a part of, where they can come and, you know, talk about those things in a space that's not going to judge them. It's not going to, you know, ridicule them. It's not going to troll them.
Yeah.
Is great. It's like I formed like this little community that has taken a life of its own. And I attribute a lot of that to my plan in future authoring, because for sure when I started doing, you know, I wrote down my 8 goals, and I said, you know, I had different domains for each one, and a lot of them were about who I wanted to be. And I wanted to be someone who was, I think, okay, so I think of support. You know, if you're supporting someone, you are supported. If you're motivating someone, you are motivated. And if you are being motivated, then, you know, you are motivating. And so I think of it as being in support, you know, and one of my goals was to be in support, like in the cycle of support. And I'm in it now. And it's great. And I mean, I don't know if that would resonate with a lot of people, what people get out of future authoring usually, because maybe theirs is a more tactical experience. But for me, it's been really profound.
Well, I completely, I haven't done it myself. Probably I should. I think it would be interesting. I'm 56 years old, so I don't have as much future as I used to. But you know, I'm famously bad at ambitiously. Well, not famously bad at it. I know people who are worse, obviously, because I've done something. But I tend to focus. You know, there's always these dichotomies, these dualisms in life, and one of them is the moment, the Kairos. There's in Greek, there's 2 words for time. There's Kairos and chronos. Yeah, and yeah. Kairos is the moment when right. This is the effort. This is the push. This is the transformation point. This is the inflection point. This is the now. Now is the time. And then there's the maintenance. And life always has both of those. And so one of the things that I've noticed in church work is churches need to have both of those, but it's hard to figure out how to, I don't want to say institutionalize, because that puts it in a certain frame, but how to manage both of those on a sustainable level for people. And that's part of the reason that we need community, mm-hmm. because the principality of the community, the ethos of the community, communities themselves build these principalities, these persons as such, and the person that the community builds manages all of the different elements of that community and maintains them. Just like, in a sense, I was listening to this really cool conversation between Peter Thiel and a professor at Stanford of medicine, and the professor of medicine at Stanford talked about how many trillion cells are in our body and how many billion tiny little interchanges go on all the time, just so that we can function. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's an astounding thing. Yeah. And in a sense, we need those transformative Kairos moments, but we also need the community in which because we can't have all those moments, because then we just, it's a feedback loop and we burn out. So it can't all be Kairos, but it can't all be chronos. And it's got to have the right mixture of both of those.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the marriage has the wedding day and other special days in between, but it also has the mundane, getting up and going to work and doing the dishes and having the chores and worrying about money. And I mean, and they've always got to have both. And so I think culturally, I think culturally we're not real good at figuring out the two of them, because Kairos is very sellable because it's
Yeah.
explosive and dynamic and dramatic and it gets our attention.
Yeah.
But without the mundane, so I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Life, that's the way that you reach those moments of Kairos. And I love that. I love that term. I first learned that term by reading Northrup Frye
Oh yeah, yeah.
about that, and I was just like, I thought it was such a good concept. It's like that moment when time and space come together for you personally. And Carl Jung, I think, talked about that as like was tapping into that with his theories on synchronicity.
Yep.
But there's like something there, and but you're right, it is like that big moment, but life isn't all those big moments. That would be exhausting for one.
Yes.
But they are there, and I think that the work of the time between those is getting to the next one, right? And like elevating yourself so that you're ready for it when it does come. So yeah, I think that you're right. We are culturally not very good at doing that at the moment, because we are in this like instant gratification culture, right? We want that Kairos now all the time, but it's unsustainable.
So what kinds of things? So with your future authoring character arc, because I mean, arc has that implicit in it, because it isn't. There are moments of ascent in an arc and descent in the arc, and actually a story arc isn't usually a bell curve. It's more like but then there's the climax and the denouement. And so what with your people, I can understand how you're trying to move them to have a Kairos moment, to have a breakthrough, to get unstuck, and I think unstuck is a nice, because there's this, I forget, my physics is so long ago, but things get stuck and you need a little extra force to get things unstuck.
Sure.
And so then you have this leap, and that's your Kairos moment. But then what you're looking for then is not the leap, but more the
right, the equilibrium.
So what in your program is looking to facilitate, to again, institutionalize is a problematic word in our culture, but to the chronos of that process?
Yeah, well, I actually feel like the way I'm trying to formulate the program now and the curriculum is that it kind of intertwines the two, because the course is spread out. The course that I run, I have a mentorship program that's like one-on-one. That's more of like a 6-week, more intensive version of the course. But the course is 5 weeks, and it's meant to take you through basically that hero's journey, that arc we just talked about. And that arc is not all Kairos. The Kairos happens at a certain point in it.
Right.
And so I make that clear explicitly in the way that you go about getting the realizations. So people spend the first few weeks just interacting with these stories, right, and seeing what they pull out of themselves by interacting with them, and then that actually gives them some semblance of that Kairos, is what I've noticed. Usually around the 4th week, people have seen enough representations of that admirable thing that they're starting to realize that it's not in the thing, it's in them. And that is a moment of Kairos, because it means like the world is to some degree lining itself up around you, specifically. And that's a big real revelation for a lot of people. And then also for the last 3 weeks of the course or so, I start slowly building in the processes by which you take those realizations and implement them in your daily life. And that has something to do with strategies like commitment, I think, is the biggest one. I think commitment is hugely powerful. Accountability, like stating your goals to someone once you've considered them carefully, and then following through with some accountability. And like I build that into the program as well. And so it does toe that line a little bit. You may never reach that peak Kairos. Some people do, but I don't think that's what the point of it is. The point of it is to make it something sustainable and repeatable, right? So that you can then carry that forward for yourself and not be dependent on someone else or some other course that you have to keep having to come back to. So if that answers your question to some degree.
No, it does. It does. So sketch out a little bit what the character arc thing. You have some individual coaching, and I mean, how does that, if someone joins this course, what does that look like?
Yeah, so the course is a 5-week course, and it runs on like kind of a rolling schedule. So whenever a person starts, they usually will begin their course on the Monday after. But it's also not a strict 5 weeks. A lot of people have lives, and so if they miss one of the phone calls that we do each week, where I actually help walk them through, that week's exercise, then it may go a little longer. But basically, they do 5 weeks in the course. I've actually structured it like a narrative, so week 1 is the call to adventure, week 2 is the desert, then you have the ascent, the final battle, and then the hero emerges. I kind of frame each week around those ideas, so that as you go through, you're going through a small journey of your own. And that's the course itself. With the mentorship program, it's much more of like kind of a reboot. Like I said, that moment to step back from your career, to step back from your education, not let those things languish, but to take a moment each week to step back and focus on the areas of your life you're not focusing on. And I also kind of build the story element into that as well. And so those are really the 2 main elements of the character arc right now. I have some other things in the work, but they're not really ready to roll out yet. But so far, the course has been the main thing that people have been responding to. Okay. And it's been, well, again, just like the self-authoring collaboration group, it's been really gratifying for people to get that moment of Kairos, and then also to see them months later saying, look, I'm still doing it. Look, Mom, I know that. So that's what the character arc is about. I think it's about like creating that space, and also about understanding from a value perspective, like my personal values. What do they tell me about why I'm doing what I'm doing? And that, I think, is a small piece of wisdom that people take away from the course.
Okay. And people can find that at thecharacterarc.org.
It's thecharacterarc.com, and that's A-R-C, not A-R-K. And actually on the resources page, is characterarc.com/resources. I created a guide. It's a free guide that you can download. Called this. The technique I use for helping people to watch the movies and pull out those traits that are relevant to their values is called smart streaming. And so I have a free guide to smart streaming that I just give away because I think it's such a valuable technique for people to have under their belt. It's like a tool. Okay. So there's a free guide to that on that website. I also actually keep all my future authoring and past authoring resources there as well. I created a planner for future authoring and a planner for past authoring that visualizes the exercises so that you can actually see what you're getting yourself into.
Okay.
Characterarc.com is where you can find all those things.
Well, I'll put you send me any links that you want to include with this in the notes, and I'll include them in the notes. So
certainly, I will do that. Yeah.
Any other things that you wanted to get to today?
No, I mean, we just like last time. What's a whirlwind? These are the most enjoyable whirlwind conversations that I have. And some of these long weeks is a real nice break from that.
Oh, well, I enjoy it. I'm so excited about what you're doing. And again, I'll put the link to our last conversation so people can find that, because I think your life itself is a testimony to this. And I'm excited about what you're doing, and I'm sure if you're finding it gratifying, that's sometimes people say to me, oh, I would hate your job. And I think I got the greatest job in the world. I really do. I love my job and I love doing it, and I love the different aspects of it. But part of what is so gratifying, it's difficult sometimes, but part of what's so gratifying is coming alongside people and being a part of their successes and even sometimes a part of their tragedies. That's there are few greater honors that you can give to a person than to share your life with them, and these kinds of jobs afford that.
Yeah, well, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. And also I think like when I left, I was working at Apple before I left to go form the character arc, and so that was tough as a decision to go from something so stable, and it was insane in some people's opinions, but I regretted it not one day. It's been overwhelmingly like better on this side of things, so it has been that way. And I also get to meet and talk to people like yourself, which is a great joy as well. So thank you for having me on.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you again. And we'll put the notes below, and that we'll put the links and stuff below in the comments so people can follow up. And because I know there's a lot of people out there that, sometimes they want me to do it. And it's like, it's not quite my job. If you're in my church, well, that's a different thing, but I can't do this for the internet. And so I hope people will look you up and avail themselves of the resources that you have to offer.
All right. Thanks very much, Paul. I appreciate it.
Great to see you again, Khemit.
You too.
Take care.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.